Hey you.
Huh? Huh?
Yes, you.
Huh?
Has this ever happened to you?
Uh-oh. Oh, my fucking knees!
I'm tired.
If you've ever played a game in the Monster Hunter franchise, I'm sure it has. And if you've been playing long enough, these perilous conditions have likely led to more than a few carts. Of course, I'm talking about status ailments.
No! Please! Have mercy!
Love them or hate them, they've been part of the franchise since its inception. Most take effect immediately, while others take a bit to really kick in.
Shit, I don't even know. Like, I can't even tell you that. Like, you know.
But the general rule is that they're all triggered by getting hit in one way or another. But not just any hit. In all cases where you find yourself afflicted with one of these dreadful ailments, the effect only activates if the player is tagged by a specific monster attack. From basic poisons to explosive slime to an infectious frenzy, there's no shortage of ways monsters can royally complicate the otherwise simple combat loop of hit the monster whilst not getting hit yourself. However, there is a subsection of ailments that can prove especially fatal for even the most prepared hunter: the incapacitators. These three ailments completely immobilize the hunter upon taking effect, and basically gives the monster a freebie while you're lying face down in the muck. And you'd better hope the monster doesn't choose to wind up a haymaker, cause, like it or not, you're gonna have to take whatever comes next head on. Luckily, these ailments are relatively rare among the beasties you fight, and are often attached to monsters that either don't pose much of a threat, or have a far more dangerous method of depleting that green bar of yours. Well, all except for one. The subject of this video, stun. But before we get into that, I'd like to take a deep dive into the function and purpose of Monster Hunter ailments, as they have a whole lot of interesting history and connections to third-person action games as a whole. So, let's get to it. From what I can find online, your hunter could get poisoned, paralyzed, slept, and stunned, even going as far back as the first Monster Hunter for the PS2. These negative conditions were, and continue to be, a means to spice up the fights, but also serve a unique function that is often overlooked. Ailments are a teaching tool. Allow me to give you an example. Basarios isn't just dangerous for his rock-hard hide that deflects nearly all attacks, but the sleep gas he expels cannot be blocked like other monster attacks, meaning that if you want to hit his soft underbelly, you need to be prepared to get out of dodge at a moment's notice. If you are caught, you might end up getting hit by his rolling charge or fire beam, which will hurt even more. The sleep gas is a very specific attack that has a very unique animation, making it easy to notice after the first time you're forced into taking a nap. Basarios uses it pretty sparingly, and can mix it up with poison gas instead, making it less frustrating to deal with, as it's not a constant nuisance. Because of its specificity and rarity, getting hit by sleep feels pretty fair in this fight, and allows players to easily intuit how they should alter their playstyle to avoid such a dangerous condition in the future. Now, why did I go off on a tangent about Basarios farts for so long? Well, it's because the way sleep is utilized with Basarios is emblematic of how most ailments, and elemental blights for that matter, are handled in Monster Hunter. Look at almost any ailment, and you can see a similar philosophy in how they're used to teach players not only how to improve against a specific monster, but how to improve at combat as a whole. Another example, Rathian's backflip poisons you not just to show you how dangerous a flying Rathian can be, but to test you on what to do when you're poisoned by a monster. Forgetting or running out of antidotes is a valuable lesson in the importance of preparation, and dying from said poison shows you that, unlike other conditions, leaving it to fester can and will actively end your life if you aren't mindful of the drain. Smart hunters can cut the tail to mitigate the poison, which demonstrates that focusing specific monster parts can help reduce the difficulty of the hunt, and adds more depth to an otherwise pretty basic fight. Across the vast majority of monsters that can inflict ailments, a pretty clear pattern emerges of how ailments are used to teach valuable lessons and add depth to combat. However, not all fights execute ailments as well as Rathian and Basarios. Most of the more disliked fights in the franchise occur when monsters use ailments far too frequently, and this is especially true when it comes to the incapacitators. Yeah, let's not forget about these guys. Nobody likes getting slept every 6 goddamn seconds because swatting a flying rat out of the air and paying attention to 20 sleep clouds at the same time just isn't feasible. But I digress. One significant piece of design in Monster Hunter's combat is that anything a monster can do to you, you should be able to do back in some way. Monsters can grab you, and so you can mount them back. Monsters can inflict elemental damage, and so you can do it right back. And of course, monsters can inflict ailments, and so you can do it right back. This one seemingly unremarkable design decision makes the world and monsters seem more fair and engaging. The hunters aren't unstoppable gods somehow immune to toxins and flame, but neither are the monsters. Though I will note here that the advantage should be, and still is, in the monster's favor here because it's supposed to be a challenge. You only need to get grabbed once or twice in order to cart, while a mount on the monster only serves to remove about 1/20th of their health at most. Also, elemental weapons deal way less damage than a single fireball does. This philosophy of partially evening the playing field between the player and the opponent can be seen in countless other celebrated third-person action games. One great example of this is Elden Ring, where the player can use special grease to apply fire, bleed, and frost to their weapons, just to name a few, with several weapons inflicting these conditions as a base. In return, many enemies also apply these statuses to the player, and oftentimes in a far more potent fashion than the player themselves can. Seem familiar? Without this feature, the challenge these games pose for the players would feel far more insurmountable. Giving players more tools and ways to overcome the game's difficulty is what can make or break a player's enjoyment with the game. I probably don't have to say this, but From Software is a shining example of doing this exact thing in pretty much every game they make, and doing it incredibly well at that. But let's pivot away from this topic and back to Monster Hunter. Naturally, the hunter can harness even the fabled incapacitators and create weapons that, given enough hits, will open up the monster for a boatload of free damage. Well, again, except for one. Limited only to blunt attacks, the player can stun monsters through repeatedly attacking the head, causing them to fall down. Much like sleep or paralysis, this KO state allows everyone in the party to go in and get some free hits, and the best part is, you don't even need to build a specific weapon to inflict KO, as any and all blunt attacks will add stun buildup that eventually results in a knockout. But this begs the question, if we can inflict stun on the monsters without the hassle of crafting ailment weapons, surely the monsters should have an easier time stunning the player too, right? Yes, indeed, that is the case, but as I've alluded to many times now, stun is a very special case, and unfortunately, its implementation is by far the most inconsistent, frustrating, and confusing out of any ailment in the series. Let's talk about stun. can divide stun into the player portion and the monster portion, and when it comes to how players can inflict stun on monsters, I generally don't have any issues. As I mentioned earlier, any and all blunt attacks contribute to stunning the monster, and every monster has a sort of stun gauge that must be depleted or filled, depending on how you look at things, to trigger a KO. Oh, and I actually kind of lied earlier when I said you needed to use blunt attacks specifically. There's actually several weapons with unique ways of dealing KO damage. Notably, the Charge Blade with impact files, Switch Axes with the exhaust file, Bowguns with the sticky ammo type, and bows with their new rock drop caltrops thingy. Yeah. It makes stunning the monster into a general strategy applicable across many weapons, and not just the ones with blunt attacks as part of their base moveset, of which there already aren't that many. I like that there's a sort of extra reward mechanic for landing repeated blows on what typically is the monster's most dangerous body part, on top of the massive weak spot damage the head takes. Heck, the whole gameplay style of Hammer is just repeatedly bashing the monster's brains out to rack up huge KO damage, which essentially makes every single hammer an ailment weapon. The fact that it's only the head as well helps distinguish stun from other ailments, as ailment weapons always apply their specific status statically every couple of hits, regardless of body part. See, the problem I have with stun has nothing to do with how players utilize it, but everything to do with how the monsters utilize it. The way stun works on players is a lot different to how it works on monsters. You see, players don't have weak points, so getting hit in the head or the toe is all the same. So how it works is that sometimes when a monster attacks you and you get hit, wait, this can't be right. Surely you can't just get KO'd from anything, right? I know. What does the game itself say about stun? World gives a lot of information since it was meant to be more friendly to newer players. You know, cast a broader net. Surely there's at least a basic explanation of... Okay, that's a bit too basic. Well, surely though, the wiki has some answers. The community is usually on top of things, Well, I guess we know that it's a random chance that increases with successive hits? Okay, well, maybe there's some sort of indicator or visual effect that pops up when you're close to getting stunned. You know, like the frenzy buildup bar or the sparks when Blast Blight is close to going off. Nope. Nothing. So, what you're telling me is that there's a status that completely immobilizes me for several seconds, and the only thing I can do to avoid it entirely is to play perfectly without getting hit. And every monster in the game can inflict it, yeah. Alright, before I start deconstructing the travesty that is player stun, let me at least try to see if this godforsaken status can be used as a teaching tool. You know, like how poison can teach you about item management and part breaks, and sleep teaches you to pay attention to monster animations and that blocking isn't always an option. The only thing stun communicates is to not get hit a lot. As if, I don't know, losing HP or carding doesn't already communicate that just fine without being random. Alright. Allow me to set up a scenario for you. You sit down with a friend and try to introduce them to the combat of Monster Hunter World. They get the basics down, find a weapon that they like, and progress through the first few assignments. They get to the quest to hunt a Puke and end up getting poisoned. What advice could you give them? You could say, try to cut the tail. That will severely dampen its ability to poison you. Be careful with your positioning as the poison spit lingers on the ground a bit. Or even, it's better to unsheath your weapon and get rid of the poison now so you don't get one-shotted later. These are all not only very helpful and intuitive pieces of advice, but they're also applicable to later fights as well, which gives newer players a good foundation in understanding the ailment and how to play around it. Now, imagine sitting down with that same newbie friend a while later, and they get stunned by a Baroth and then get killed by an unavoidable follow-up charge. They look at you and say, "What happened? Why couldn't I move there? What should I do to avoid that?" In this scenario, What advice could you possibly give? I don't know. Get good? Just don't get hit? Wow. Thanks, coach. I was actually getting hit on purpose there. Silly me. Instead of teaching valuable lessons about gameplay, stun just exists to punish the player seemingly at random. On the topic of stun's inherent randomness, one might argue, well, sometimes when I get bit by a great Gyros, paralysis doesn't activate because of RNG. So why is stun so much worse? Two things: specificity and rarity. I chose those two words very carefully for a reason. There's a player expectation after the first time you're paralyzed that getting bit again will paralyze you again. And rightfully so. But you wouldn't expect every single attack, let alone every single monster, to have a chance of paralyzing you. After fighting Great Gyros a while, you'll likely come to the realization that only his bite attacks have a chance of inflicting paralysis, and even then, it's not guaranteed. Paralysis may not occur every single time, but one can still learn how it works, and, more importantly, avoid it entirely by employing certain strategies. Strategies like staying away from his head and avoiding or blocking bite attacks. Also, if he did paralyze you every single time you got bit, the fight would be beyond obnoxious. When it comes to any ailment, and even the elemental blights, they're pretty much always the product of incredibly specific attacks that are A, clearly telegraphed, and B, make sense. Getting hit by a fireball sets you on fire. Standing in sleep gas puts you to sleep. When a status-inflicting attack is specific and rare, it becomes more predictable, and there needs to be some element of predictability for negative statuses to be balanced and, better yet, feel fair. To really hammer home the importance of predictability here, let's play a little game. Let me show you 3 clips and ask you which one of these monster attacks leads to a stun. Clip 1 from Monster Hunter Freedom 1, a classic, getting hit after my getup. What do you think? Will this charge stun me? Alright, have you locked in your answer? Those of you familiar with some stun mechanics in World know that getting hit from behind gives a higher chance of being stunned. How much higher? No fucking clue. Don't you just love random vague game mechanics? On top of that, Diablos' charge attack specifically also has a higher chance of stunning you compared to other moves. Put it all together, and nothing. But I do get stunned by his roar right after, so I'll give you half a point if you said yes. Next up, we have a clip from Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. Here you can see that I'm at full health until I get hit by a gnarly Rathian backflip. What about this one? If your answer was yes again, I'm sorry to inform you that, once again, it's incorrect. No, obviously, Rathian's Take Flight animation that deals like 5 damage is what actually stuns me into a true combo. Skill issue, am I right? And for this last one, I have an old clip from Monster Hunter World. I start a quest to hunt a Lunastra and immediately crash land next to her. I try to run away before she sees me so I can buff up and drink a cool drink, but she immediately catches up to me and hits me twice, putting me on death's door. Do you think this is the one? Alrighty, well, I just landed like 2 seconds ago and only got hit twice, so maybe this won't stun me. And it actually doesn't. Whew, good thing I managed to get away after all that too. Wait, no, stop the clip. As you can probably tell, stun can be procced from the most random attacks at the most random times. If I showed you 3 clips of me getting hit by Oregon's gas or a Rathian's backflip, you would immediately be able to tell if I'd get slept or poisoned, because they're predictable, and that's the important part. When a status has as strong of a downside as stun has, it needs to adhere especially closely to the unwritten rules of being specific and rare. But stun? Stun just isn't. And that's why it oftentimes feels so inconsistent, frustrating, and confusing. And frankly, it feels like one of those mechanics that should have been scrapped or reworked for Generation 5. Now, before I wrap this up and explain how I personally would fix stun to be more in line with the rest of Monster Hunter's ailments, there is a point of contention I must address. When I discussed the topics and arguments of this video with my friends and fellow hunters, a pretty interesting point arose that I couldn't really disagree with. As you get better at Monster Hunter, stun becomes less prevalent and annoying. As you learn your weapon, the monster's movesets, and acquire skills that boost your ability to avoid damage, you naturally get hit less and less. And as such, stun doesn't become as big of a deal as I've perhaps made it out to be in this video. I mean, not only can the monster just miss while you're stunned, but it can also just choose a weak follow-up attack that doesn't even hurt. On top of that, your teammates, or more recently your Palico, can hit you out of it immediately. That's not really something that can happen with ailments like Defense Down. However, I ultimately still think that stun's flaws as an ailment are simply too egregious to overlook, even if I rarely find myself getting stunned nowadays. Oh, and one last thing. Because the whole point of stun is to punish repeated mistakes, I'd even argue that it's especially discouraging for newer players who are bound to make a lot of mistakes as they learn the movement and combat of Monster Hunter. And that's not a good thing. To summarize, stun on the players is Monster Hunter's worst ailment for the following reasons. It breaks the unwritten rule that ailments should be specific because it's impossible to predict exactly which attacks will stun you and how close you are to getting stunned. It breaks the unwritten rule that ailments should be rare because of its random chance to occur on any given attack of any given monster. And finally, it doesn't teach the player anything valuable about the combat or gameplay, and instead just punishes you even more for getting hit. So, how would I fix stun? Well, I'm no game designer, but there is a way I think stun can be redesigned to fit in better with its ailment brethren while still feeling distinct. I don't think removing it entirely is a good solution here, despite how passionate I might have come off in this video, because again, anything you can do, the monster should also be able to do, and stun is no exception. My solution would be something like this. As you get hit with successive attacks, a subtle yellow particle effect would begin to appear above the hunter's head, becoming stronger with more particles the more you get hit. Instead of being random, stun now functions more like the monster's stun, where if it builds up fully, it procs the effect. Stronger attacks, or blunt attacks like Oregon's Chin Slam, deal proportionally more stun than weaker attacks. Every monster can still inflict stun, but now it's easier to gauge how close to it you are, and act accordingly. As long as you don't get hit, the particles will fade away, slowly at first, but then faster the longer you go without getting hit. This way, it's easier to notice and counteract the stun before it happens, which makes it less frustrating and gives some actual counterplay. I even think they could repurpose an older mechanic from a previous ailment. Bitter bugs could be used to clear the confusion ailment that the monster Malfestio inflicted with its dust. I think it would be cool if you could eat bitter bugs in a similar vein to immediately remove all stun buildup off your hunter. This way, if you get hit by a strong attack with a lot of stun buildup, there's a way to get rid of it and get back in the fray quickly without the fear of getting stunned immediately if you mess up again. Thunderblight would of course also be changed to fit this system, with every attack dealing double stun or something similar. This would make Thunderblight way more of a threat and way easier to visualize. Thunderblight has always been the odd one out among the elements, where Fire, Dragon, Water, and Ice Blight have immediate and clear downsides that heavily encourage you to down a Nullberry. Thunderblight, however, always felt like something you can just ignore until it goes away, because you often don't feel or see the supposed downside. You can often get hit multiple times with Thunderblight and not get stunned, so why even bother scrolling through your item bar to find nullberries for it? I think if Capcom wanted to be a little extra evil, they could even make it so that Thunderblight passively increases the player's stun buildup, eventually stunning you if you don't get it off fast enough. There we go. Stun now teaches you about item management and playing more carefully when ailment buildup is high. The visual indicator and proportional stun amount from weak to strong attacks removes the frustrating randomness and makes the ailment predictable. And finally, the bitterbug consumption and faster decay over time gives stun some real counterplay options. Alright, I think I've yapped enough for one video. Let me know what you think though. Do you agree that stun needs a rework, or is it fine as is? If you think a rework is warranted, what would you do to change it? And what do you think of my proposed changes? As always, if you want more videos like this, like and sub and etc, you get it. Apologies for not being active for a while. This video took way longer than it should have, but I'm happy with how it turned out in the end. So, have a good one. See ya!
Holy fuck.